Kanye called me because he really liked the magazine and wanted me to work with him on art direction stuff. And I tattooed Kanye as part of that, but really I worked for about a year with him on all kind of art direction things.
Welcome back to Watches And. Today, it's watches and tattooing, which is not a surprise. Tattooists and barbers love watches. We've probably made that deduction ourselves when we've looked at the wrists of our barbers getting haircuts, or our tattooists as they drill us with pain and beautiful designs. There's something about these art forms where people are using their hands that necessitate or that really open up the possibility for watches to be a part of these people's lives. And Maxime is not your average tattooist. He has led a spectacularly colourful life, which you'll hear about, and he has been a part of many cultural zeitgeists, including Kanye West's world, Adam Lambert's world, and many others.
I think all my watches were meant to be perceived in 3D. They're not a 2D thing. And I feel that having sort of monochromatic treatment is where you get the 3D quality of a piece in the purest form.
Mm-hmm. A portfolio that extends itself well off the canvas of the human skin, right through to the watches, the sang-bleu designs of Hublot, which have really been such a perfect canvas in themselves to be a place to play for this medieval geometry. It always arouses me in some way because the way that these geometric patterns move as the time ticks on, it really is such an elevated way to tell the time, and often a totally illegible way to tell the time if we're being completely honest. But it is a niche of the watch world that I believe has some real contemporary currency. You would think that the conversation is going to be all about design, but it is not. This is about culture. This is Maxime and I discovering that we have grown up with the same influences. We have grown up with the same music in our lives. We're the same age, only I think 6 months apart, and that really comes through in this chat. It is one of the most free-ranging conversations I've ever had on this podcast. And it's because we just start vibing. We hit this frequency where we're really understanding the world that each other has come from, and yet we've landed in completely different places, but we're both obsessed with watches. So I hope you enjoy this chat. This is one of the most free-ranging and interesting conversations I have recorded for Watches and I hope you feel the same. Let's get into it. Maxime, hello.
Hi, it's so nice to talk to you in person.
Indeed. I've seen your Instagram. It's one of those typical modern relationships where we've never actually spoken in the reels.
Yeah. But I've known each other through social media, so it's it's great. It's I do enjoy that even a lot more than just static images.
It's a strange familiarity that you have with people, so I do feel like I know you, but I want to advance that in real time and in the real today by asking you lots of questions. The theme of this podcast is watches and other things, watches and athletics, watches and tennis, watches and, in your case, I hesitate to say tattooing because you are more than that. You're a creative hurricane. What do your kids think you do? How do you describe it?
I love this question. I think that'd be a good question for them, really. But I think they definitely think I draw. I do, drawings. They see me writing a lot of emails, talking to a lot of people. I think altogether they are probably the people who have the best true understanding of the full spectrum or the actual reality of what I do, because it's one of those, sometimes contradictions you probably experience as well, being a public figure, where people, you brand yourself in a certain way and people see something and they're just like, yeah, of course, that's what they do. But the reality of it might be, hundreds of hours of emails for each,
So
minute
much more boring.
spent. Yeah, the glam is a pure facade. So I think they really have that sense. And I try my best to take them to see what I do. But they really have this sort of backstage view for sure. Yeah.
So have you ever had the pleasure of, because I once was in a school time environment and one of the teachers said to one of my children, one of my daughters, "What does your daddy do?" And one of my daughters said, "He's famous." That was the first answer. And the teacher raised her eyebrows, looked at me up and down and went, "No, I don't think he is." And then another one of my daughters said, he sells watches, which is also not really true. And then the third one she just said, he just does YouTube. So between the three of them, it was sort of I suppose there was some truth in there, but it was also, I was just worried that one of them was just going to say he writes emails, because I think that's what they see me doing, same as you.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's funny you said that, because one of the biggest pride of my kids, our twin boys were obsessed with the fact that I actually was on YouTube. And for them, like, being on YouTube is like the equivalent of being on Disney Channel for us in the 80s or something. And for them, the fact that they could say, you can actually Google my dad on YouTube and he'll be there, was like the biggest pride they have, and something they were bragging about at school. And I thought it was very funny.
The only bigger thing would be if it was you playing Minecraft.
Yes, indeed. And yes, indeed. It's very much a Minecraft themed house over here.
Minecraft isn't the most divorced world to you, is it, aesthetically?
I mean, the 100%. I'm kind of. There's a lot of things about video games in general that I sort of wish I was born a little later than I was, and it's definitely something I did sort of superficially. Yeah, I grew up with platform games and Mario Bros and stuff like that, and I still love them. But really, the fact that you just go there and just do things and be there, and there's like, you can have a birthday on Roblox, or people gathering for you to say hi on Minecraft. That is truly fascinating, and in so many ways, and aesthetically as well, to a large extent, the fact that you can just build things, and occasionally I find it a bit visually confusing, which is part of the appeal, I guess. Is like, where are you? Am I looking up or down, or something very sort of psychedelic about it? It's like microdosing on sort of video games. The one thing that I find the most cringy and irritating, though, is the way that YouTubers have to talk. Like, there's this sort of very specific delivery that YouTubers have. Like, I just want to turn the sound off. I used to play video games just listening to music. Like, I love the image, I love the principles of the games, but there's the YouTube style, which applies to other things. Like, if you know Blippi, it's like evil to me. It's like that what our youngest daughter is listening to. I'm like, no, it's bad for your brain.
Maxime, I don't know where to start in describing you, because you're obviously famous for tattooing famous people. But where my life intersects with you is in the way that you have this very specific creative vision and signature that collaborates very well with any number of things. Like, even glancing at your website, we have snowboards, we have beach towels, we have luxury watches. It's just this really intriguing world of collaboration for you. But I do want to start by just zeroing in on our subject, because people listening to this are deeply addicted to watches. But tell me about the watches in your life, the role they've played, the dreams they've created, the memories that you have of watches, because they're just sort of ubiquitous, and yet they're kind of personal too. And I'd love to start by just asking you about watches in your life, the first memories of them, the first watches you had. Tell me.
Watches have been a a sort of red thread for on many levels in my entire life.
I want to know the models that you remember, the first ones you touched, your parents, your first memories. That's so interesting to watch people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up two Swiss people, but a mother who grew up in La Chaux-de-Fonds, which in French is often dubbed the La Cité Horlogère. So it's really Le Loc, La Chaux-de-Fonds.
This is the heart of watchmaking.
Yes, absolutely. And I just remember always hearing about watchmaking. And so the thing that I often try to mention and that, people often don't really consider is that in Switzerland, the watches are to Switzerland what the car industry is to Detroit. It is a working class culture. It is a
very good point.
Really a thing that people and the majority of the watches made are not the watches that are being auctioned, talked about in connoisseur circles, etc. They are your airport watches. They are quartz watches. I was born in the late 70s, so really it was the quartz crisis, but also people still, brands like Tissot, brands like Longines, brands like Erhardt, what's the name, or Lacroix, all of those, Louis Erhardt, Maurice Lacroix, what else, Abel,
Mercier, Raymond Weil.
Yeah, all of those, even Fossil, etc. Those or Swatch Group was sort of beginning at that point, and those brands were the pride of everyday people.
Yes,
because they worked there, and the majority of them didn't work at tiny luxury workshops. They worked in at Swatch Group, or they worked in at ETA, or they worked at Tissot or whatever. My grandfather was a physician and would have those people as his patients, and you heard about even what kind of chronic pains watchmakers get, things like this.
They did, hunched over their desks, and the way that I'm sure there were headaches from having to squint all the time into their loops.
Yeah, entirely. Those very specific eye conditions. That's really the sort of the general landscape that I grew up in, the general context. So what happened afterwards is my father is a journalist, and as a very young teen, maybe in around 10, started be more conscious of the world around, and it's the Swatch era.
So you were 4 years old when the Swatch watch was launched. Because let's put a little bit of context, Maxime. I don't know if you've ever gone deep with your parents on this, but La Chaux-de-Fonds in the late 70s would have been a very dark and scary place, because to put this in context, in the 70s, the Swiss was slowly but surely just collapsing. The Swiss watch industry was in a state of permanent and rapidly accelerating decline. There was 2 out of 3 people in the watch industry lost their jobs in this period. So it was a really frightening time for people in this part of the world, in your neck of the woods there. I'm not sure, did you feel that at all growing up? Did you feel a sense of crisis that you mentioned before?
Oh, absolutely. And this is another thing that people often get misconstrued about Switzerland is of course from the outside, the brand of Switzerland is a sort of luxury and hospitality and tourism, but it's not Monaco. It's a miniature country that is the same structure as any other country, and that has a lot of lower middle class or working class people. When I was growing up, I spent time in La Chaux-de-Fonds because my family
and the Jura Valley,
there.
for those who don't know, is as you're driving, I drove past the sign yesterday, Maxime. It's the Jura Valley. It has a picture of a watchmaker hunched over a desk getting some sort of chronic ailment that your grandfather would fix. And the Jura Valley is considered to be the touristic center of the watchmaking tradition, and it's a large physical area that contains most of the brands we know and love.
Yes, absolutely. Because historically, a big part of Swiss watchmaking started in the Franche-Montagne, which is part of the Jura, a mountain chain, which is on the other side of Switzerland, as a sort of opposing the Alps, which is a lower range, but it is between France. It sort of separates France from Switzerland, and a lot of watchmaking came from France, where the knowledge was developed, and then a lot of people moved to Switzerland, and that knowledge was sort of slowly transferred to Switzerland, through, among others, because of the campaigns against Protestants in France, which is interesting because another thing that I do is type design, and the history of type design is very similar. A lot of type designers moved out of France towards the Netherlands and Switzerland, in countries that were more welcoming to Protestants.
Can we describe what you're wearing right now? Because it is just so on brand for you. Is this your collaboration with Blanciaga on type?
No, not at all. The Balenciaga job was that you're referring to probably was not a collaboration per se. It was a commission that was one of the relatively early commission that we got for Swiss Typefaces, my type design company, where we developed the logo type for Balenciaga, which has now been replaced, but which was used for quite a while. It was a commission. It was not a collaboration. So a lot of the things, I mean, just a small note, because, obviously I'm not going to, I'm not wasting time to correct such things, but there's occasionally some things that are written on me where people get things a little bit confused. There's some designs that I do or that my companies do that are not collaborations. There's collaborations, which are the things that you referred to earlier, the snowboard, the things like that, where the brand is important. But then there's a whole part, which is mainly the type design aspect, where my companies are simply...
It's an agency.
Exactly. It's an agency, it's a design studio. And we
still pretty damn cool, though. Like... You had a hand in Balenciaga's type font. I mean, that's kind of beyond collaboration. That's pretty epic to see that era of Balenciaga just being something that what do you call it, leading and kerning and all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's magical, but also designing typefaces is probably comparable to designing fabrics for the fashion industry. You're also the one that never really truly gets credit for anything, but you're everywhere. No one can really do anything without you. But nonetheless,
you're not one of the rock stars. I slightly took you away from the subject. You were talking about the fact that type design also migrated around Europe at that time because there was such a diaspora happening among various religions. But the point that we're making there is that there was this great drain of talent into the Jura Valley, who quickly became consolidated into a very powerful industry. So
what happened is there's another city called Biel in German, which was known to be super rough. And I spent a lot of time there when I was, my teens and early adult. I was pretty involved in hip hop things and doing graffiti and parties, and so we were in those cities a lot. But yeah, it was definitely pretty grim to put it mildly. And
what do you mean by that? Because I don't think people associate any town in Switzerland with a grim, rough town. But was it truly?
Oh yeah. I mean, and it's exactly what you can think of, just projects the equivalent of for Switzerland or HLM, just working class really, and a lot of amazing people, of course, a lot of amazing art being made and etc. But also, that kind of 80s vibe that was like super glam on the one hand, but also really intense on the other side. And then slightly fast forward. But my father, as a journalist, covered a lot of the revival and the rebirth of mechanical watchmaking. And I remember hearing about Jean-Claude Biver really early on in the very late 80s, early 90s, because my father was writing on those subjects, which were obviously hugely important for Switzerland. What's quite important for my taste as well in watches, and to explain my almost contradictory aspect of my interest is that of course I was hearing about this, but I didn't care so much. You're a kid. I wanted a Swatch. My first watch was a Swatch, and I liked, there was that whole thing of wearing several swatches on one arm, and it was pop, it was shiny and colorful, and it was fun. And then as a young kid as well, there was Flic Flac, which was a sort of a sub-brand of Swatch. There was Clip, which was a sort of clip that had a watch that sort of stuck to it. It was a big thing in for a little while, and then Swatch made all kinds of things. There was those with elastic band and a bigger case that you could sort of pop on and off. It started being a James Bond thing. It was a fun era as well.
So in terms of Swatch, it's quite an incredible story, because I lived in a tiny country town in Australia, a little town called Benalla. It's like 7,000 people. It is the furthest place from where you were skateboarding and probably listening to the Beastie Boys. What was the music you were skating to?
Oh, that's a good question.
Paul's Boutique?
I liked the Beastie Boys. I liked License to Ill. But I was
a bit harder.
more interested in, I was more interested in the sort of raw street kind of rap. But that's also how I learned to speak English. So it was a very interesting moment of sort of needing to understand. I don't know. I just somehow more connected to the lyrics more when I heard, Fight the Power and things like that. It spoke to me more than Beastie Boys. Somehow I didn't understand what Beastie Boys were talking about.
It was just bratty party music, really, but I did love it.
I get it retrospectively.
Yeah, it still holds up. But I think the point I'm trying to make, though, is that they sold in the realm of 500 million units in that first year, which is just, it explains why this cultural wave reached me in Benalla and you in Beale. I suppose that gets to the point of watches in culture. It seems that hairdressers and tattooists in particular, and chefs, guys that work with their hands, are looking at their hands a lot, seem to have a real kink for tattoos. So can you take me from that Swatch era of your childhood up to you being this super famous tattooist, and talk me through the watches that got you to that point? And also, why is it that it seems like this little cohort is so into their watches?
Okay, that's a great question, and I want to say, let's just put it out there, but I really enjoyed this conversation because it touches on things that are for me.
This is not what it's meant to be. You're meant to be a tattooist who has a passing interest in watches. Your whole life is deeply marinated in watches and watchmaking. It's crazy, man. I did not expect this.
Yeah, absolutely. And way before tattoo. So I'll get there. But what's interesting is we just talked about music, and the next thing that connected me to watches very early on is Eric B. and Rakim. Among others, but and Flavor Flav, of course, who had the clock around the neck, like watches as part of a sort of very, very fluid part of jewelry statement, and in this
style.
extremely exactly in this extremely creative way that hip hop has, and very free to sort of reappropriate things, and so I both had this background in sort of historical watchmaking, but also what I identified or what I associated myself with as a conscious kid and teenager was something where those things existed, but coming from an entirely different angle. And that, I think, also truly can give a sense of different aspects of my interest in that. But you mentioned tattooing and watches, which is really interesting. There's even a little community of tattooists that collect watches and talk about watches, etc.
And they're both kind of anachronistic. They have direct links to archaic times, in the sense that they're ancient arts in a way.
Exactly. So it all proceeds with the sort of idea of, okay, there's what is this natural given, something that does happen organically or by accident. We are going to do take this and put intention in it, put symbolism in it, as human beings, and progressively build culture around it. And that is what culture is in general. Like, ultimately, cultural aspect is based on fairly basic things, basic needs, moving, eating, building houses, things like that. So there definitely is something extremely similar in the approach and the motivations behind those different practices. And in my life, it sort of became, I can't say it was an obsession per se. It was a continuous presence in my life until a certain point where I realized, or truly asking myself, like, who am I? What am I doing? What am I bringing into the world? And then, like, we all have moments like that. I guess you're like, okay, well, I do like, I don't know, rap music, but I'm a young, kid from Switzerland. I don't have anything to bring to rap music. Before I started being a tattooist, so I think my first luxury watch was, I got a mechanical watch. I don't like luxury, but the same, but mechanical watch I bought in my late 20s with my first big sort of paid design job. And I was like, okay, well, clearly there's something where this resonates with me in a way that it doesn't to a lot of other people.
So tell me, what was that watch? So you've got me hanging on here. What was that? What was that first mechanical watch?
So the first mechanical watch was a Rolex.
Mm-hmm.
Retrospectively, it wasn't the right choice, but anyway, it was. It had to start somewhere. It was a deep sea, and I'd never liked wearing it, to be honest.
I know these two guys in Australia, Mick Squires and Benjamin Lorcas, these two tattooists. One's, I think, from the Black Mark Tattoo. It's called the Black Mark in, I think it's in Northcote in Melbourne. And they both had deep seas at different times, and I think at the same time. So it seems to be another one of those big statement Rolexes that is, it could not be further from where you've ended up with your incredibly futuristic and I would say more interesting, and I would say even ergonomic shapes. Despite your watches being large, they're very comfortable. Whereas a deep sea, in total fairness to Rolex, obviously a brand that's doing quite well, but that is a horrible watch to wear.
Yeah, well, and especially the Mark 1, which had a very narrow, they never adjusted the width of the bracelet.
The lug width was so small.
It was very small. It was the same on the clasp side. The width was the same as a Submariner, and which is completely inappropriate to the weight of the watch.
It's a hockey puck.
But I can give another anecdote, which was quite interesting. Exactly around that time. So one of the first things I did at art college was I got into publishing and then tried to publish magazines. Started a magazine called Novembre magazine, which is an art and fashion magazine, which is still going on today. And with this magazine, we did an interview with Jean-Claude Biver, actually.
Awesome.
At the time. That was pre me tattooing, pre a lot of things. So Hublot at the time, what I do remember very clearly is that they were about or had just released their Unico movement. So I know, and they were working, if you remember, they did this high complication piece called La Clé du Temps, the key of time, where you could sort of change, adjust or essentially the pace, I guess, the speed of the watch. And that was one thing that was talked about in the article. But what is interesting is I loved Hublot at the time. It had this sort of creative energy that, I'll be quite honest, especially back then, I didn't even really like Rolex. I was like what's the big deal with that brand? And I kind of, got peer pressured into getting that one. And Hublots were 14K plus for the big bag.
We need to talk about that era, man. I was doing a triathlete magazine, a hotel magazine, and a watch magazine, and that was sort of my first exposure to watches. But I remember, I tell this story, and it's a great personal risk, but I wrote Jean-Claude Biver an email saying, "Dear Jean-Claude Biver, I see that you have started a brand and that it's doing very well. I have never seen this brand in Australia, and I would like to be your brand ambassador. I have a lot of contact with celebrities, and I believe I could build the brand in Australia by being your ambassador. And I received a reply that basically said, I could hear him shouting in the text, "We do not pay ambassadors. We do not give watches to ambassadors." And he could not believe this impertinent Australian kid who had written and asked. And all I had was like, I'd interviewed John Travolta and Tom Cruise and a couple of celebrities. So I sent him all these pictures saying, every celebrity that comes to Australia speaks to me. And he wrote this reply that I was so horrified at like my own behavior that I deleted it, and I wish I'd kept it. But the energy Hublot was bringing to watchmaking at that time was hip hop. They had people of color. They had African American ambassadors. They were taking Swiss watches and luxury watches away from this preppy Patek. You don't own a Patek. You just keep it for your kid who's also got a merino sweater tied around their neck or whatever whatever the campaign was. They were coming out with these athletes and basketball players, and it was just nuts how much I wanted an Hublot as you did, because it was disruptive in the same way that seeing Fight the Power, or By the Time I Get to Arizona, which is my favorite Public Enemy track, hearing the heaviness, intensity of that music, it just actually Hublot was the watchmaking hip hop in that era, and it still electrifies me to think about it.
Oh, 100%. And I think ultimately, and it will speak to my ethos and my interest in general. I am only interested in producing things, designs, as long as they participate to an overarching cultural vision. And for me, what is today, and so we could fast forward. I mean, we could go back and forth in time.
Why not?
But what I find extremely interesting in 2023, and I do want to say, I think that March 2022 is the end of or a page or chapter of watch in industry of watch culture sort of turned very much with Watches and Wonders and the end of the pandemic and all that. And I think watch brands today truly have like there's more watches available, more watch brands than there's ever been. There's more clients as well, which is great. But there's no more just standing out easily. Everyone, you want a crazy watch? Here you have 200 crazy watches. You want a very retro, whatever, like you have too much of everything. People will judge the relevancy of a watch, but same with music. You can have an AI make the perfect Drake and The Weeknd song. Ultimately, what will make a song, a watch, a movie actually stick, actually be important? It's not how well made it is. It's not how pretty it sounds or looks. Its ability to convey or to participate to a much deeper and general cultural context. And for me, this is something that Hublot definitely had early on, and that other brands have done extremely successfully. AP followed suit, and they followed suit pretty well. Then, you see a lot of brands today, including independents. You can tell, like, they try to connect to elements. I thought, that Moser and Co. did the Vanta Black watch, which was really interesting because for me, that was an extremely smart way to interact with contemporary art, for example, because Vanta Black was developed by Anish Kapoor, one of probably the top 10 contemporary artists today. And so you can tell those efforts are there, and they will be a race or a competition of who succeeds in maintaining and developing those kind of connections in the coming years. in my opinion.
Now, look, let's get into the spaceship of your watch designs because they look like spaceships to me. They look because you talked about communicating cultural messages, which was a beautifully phrased. I'm going to be stealing that and using that because you're absolutely right. Brands and watches will be remembered for cutting through the timeline in some way, which is something that AP are very conscious of. But I don't think Hublot get enough credit for this because certainly there are many really ultra high-end brands that are now doing sapphire and colored ceramic and rubber straps.
Can I just jump in very quickly?
Yes.
For example, Jacob and Co. What I find really interesting in terms of cultural connection is when I see, the Godfather watch or whatever that thing they do.
Yes, I was at the launch of that one.
Like for me, this is a very good example of where you completely miss the mark. Or I'm like, oh, sorry, and not to mention that I'm sure James Bond still sells, but I feel that it's quite interesting to see some things that for me, some brands that also completely miss.
I suppose it shows to me that it's not a literal game of visual connection because it has all of these references and what do they say, signs that relate it to the franchise. But what for you misses there? Because it has all the Godfather things and yet I guessing it's not integrating for you.
I just find it's a bit of a missed opportunity to do something, I don't know, with a more current movie that has more relevancy today and not just a sort of nostalgia thing for, white men over 50 years old. I don't know. It's not really against The Godfather. It's that if you're going to do something this special, you might as well choose something that conveys more. And I think in that sense, and to also be fair, I don't think that the whole Marvel thing that AP was doing was that bad.
Yeah, give me a good example because I honestly feel that despite the horrible negative feedback that was heaped on the Marvel watches, for example, the Black Panther watch, by the community, I actually thought there were many things in that watch that had sort of angularity and in terms of the visual and design of those watches, they're quite striking, quite dashing, quite dynamic and quite, there's something to me holding that Black Panther watch. It's an exciting object and it's clearly handcrafted to a very high degree. So once again, in the same way that Hublot suffers a lot of online trolling and hatred unfairly, I felt that the Black Panther was a soft target. But that to me was a watch that captured more than just the reference to the character. There was something about the design of that watch that was quite that captured, that otherworldly energy of Marvel characters, that not of this earth feel.
Yes, and then I think that again for me the proxy of the brand, what Marvel represents today, and what superheroes, considering the importance in it could be Minecraft. I mean, I think it was didn't actually Moser do a Minecraft thing? Didn't they do
That was a collaboration with Second. Second did a pixelated sword hand as a way to hack a Rolex, I believe. But he brought in that pixelated sort of style of hacking and modifying watches. People like Second have really upped the game in terms of finding clever ways to bring watches into cultural conversations.
Yes, and I think, and I do want to say that could be a whole podcast in itself, but I do want to say that aftermarket customization, sort of flooding and other things like this have to be acknowledged as one of the most important creative influence and frame of reference for the cultural relevancy that I was talking about earlier for the brands in the past decade. The extraordinary explosion of development of high jewelry pieces in the past decade that is now becoming to large extent a focus for a lot of brands. I mean, it has to be said that this is because of aftermarket setting,
and hip hop as well. All of the icing,
exactly, and hip hop because hip hop made it happen. And I think I remember a time not that long ago where some very hidden racism was often kind of expressed through, watch communities by stigmatizing, kind of hip hop, blinged out pieces, etc. And the same people are now, raving about the latest, and
rainbow diamond set Hublot.
yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say, hey, let's also give credit where credit is due, because that's, I think, hip hop has shaped to a large extent what the 2023 watch industry is and will continue to do so. It reminds me a little bit of, I think it was Timberland at some point when rappers started talking about Timberlands, that did a whole campaign actually to sort of dissociate itself from hip hop, saying like, having some preppy white people saying like, oh yeah, we wear Timberland. Like there was a whole thing. I remember like a few years later, well, it was Tommy Hilfiger having the Wu-Tang walking for the show, and Timberland was fully embracing, quote unquote urban thing. And whatever, like, it is what it is. But like, the watch industry we see today has been definitely shaped or the course of it has been adjusted by those things that need to be acknowledged. So, but anyway, back to the proxy and the things like this, I think that's what worked out so well, and what Jean-Claude Biver always had, this sort of incredible figure on the post of cultural currents around him. I think something worked out with Hublot that no one really expected, maybe me a little bit, but I'm not even sure. But the fact that I was hired as an ambassador, but I actually designed a watch, and I was.
And I want to get in the spaceship, man. You've been making me wait outside the spaceship while we digress to highly interesting things. But I see your watches as these mini vehicles that obviously deliver time, so they are moving. But I want to know, because the first time I saw it, I'm going to be honest with you, and you must get this a lot, and please forgive me, but I got satanic vibes.
Oh, interesting.
It's a sort of a. How would you describe you're going to be better than me, but these watches are really the Sangleur series. They're so entirely singular and different, and never been seen before. But talk me through the spaceship of this watch and its design, and what are you communicating with it?
Well, for me, I'm not trying to communicate anything. I'm trying to create the equivalent of a Rorschach test. I'm creating something that anyone can project whatever they want on it, or whatever they, is their background. And essentially, even from a technical standpoint, when I create a shape, I will consciously remove anything that I can personally identify that definitely might read as, something religious, something, any sort of symbol, any sort of thing that is definitely associated to something unequivocally.
I want whoever's listening to this podcast right now to make sure you're looking at a Sangleur watch, because it is you brought an entirely different design language to watchmaking, and it's I remember seeing these, because it's not just a case of looking at the static image. You have to see the way the shapes interact with each other. It's just, man, it's beautiful. It's a big shout out to the ingenuity and the freshness that you've brought to me.
Thank you. I mean, I've studied for, I don't know, decades, all of those traditions, the sort of mystical, what is loosely called sacred geometry, but also I come from a scientific background. So I remember loving to do descriptive geometry. So really, geometry isn't. So
you're good at maths?
Decent. Yeah, decent. I mean, at least for the purpose of designing, it is. I do use a lot of math and geometry, literally, in my designs to make them coherent. But ultimately, the goal, the end is visual and aesthetic. But what I do is to try to achieve shapes that will have this evocation without being decisively one or the other. So, for example, and I'll just quickly, because I can get technical on it, but for example, the very first, the the very first design, the hands are based on two squares overlapping. So it's like a 90-degree angle, obviously multiply, you have sort of an octagon type of structure. Whereas the ones afterwards, because we had, for a couple reasons, but I used a triangle and hexagon structure in the 2 and 3. And this is quite a difference. But if you look, for example, at sacred art, you'll see that a Buddhist sacred geometry tends to use the 60-degree angles and the triangles and hexagon more, whereas the Islamic art tends to use the octagons and square grids. And so you have elements like this. And what I have done is, even in the first watch, there's elements already of that superimposed. So part of my inspiration was also to, for example, make sure that the watch was aesthetically coherent with the Cybertruck. Do you know what I'm saying? Or the new, if you look at all the new designs BMW is doing, I love those new cars they're doing. Like, people don't like them now, but they will eventually. All of those cars, they have the angles. The Urus has, that kind of aesthetic is very much an aesthetic. And even what I find interesting is, I remember being obsessed with the wireframe video games, or the cheesy 80s Power Rangers and things like that. A certain amount of that imagery continues even through Minecraft that we were talking about, and it's sort of still around, even though, yes, we can create extremely precise and sophisticated CGI, but that aesthetic is still around. Why? Because it has always been around, because that aesthetic is scientific. It's something we see in science, something we see in CGI and architecture and car design today. But the reason why you see something, satanic, someone else sees a Star of David, or you can see Islamic motifs in there, they're all there. They're all there. It depends on what you project on it.
It's totally true. It is a Rorschach test. And I think I just never seen such a complex geometric design on a watch. And certainly legibility was a challenge the first time I looked at it, because I'm trying to, there's an hour tip there and there's a minute tip there, which demystifies the whole thing. But it truly, as you said, Hublot were groundbreaking in that early period in the way that they would mix with countercultural references as well as mainstream cultural references. But gee, they've really swung into this world of art and design with yourself, with Orlinsky, with Arsham. It's a pretty powerful team there, isn't it, of people who have this design language that translates so sort of interestingly and vividly onto a watch.
Yes, and I do want to shout out, or at least mention briefly, that I think one of the most interesting brands for me, or something that's low-key been an inspiration as well, is Uhrwerk. And I've always loved all the guichet pieces. I love the rattrapante displays. I remember seeing the early Uhrwerk stuff, and it was like, okay, yes.
There's a connection there between you two, isn't there? This is Felix. And, oh man, some of the pieces in the way that he would sort of imitate a reptile skin in the engraving of the watch. Mm-hmm. There's just some stunning... I would say again that
it's Transformers.
Yeah, Transformers, and having the satellite function with the rotating discs, and the T-Rex is the one I'm talking about, which has this insane reptile, like a scaly skin.
Yeah, it's a tessellated texture, but which is interesting, because it's sort of the kind of structures you find in even sunflower, in the way the sunflower seeds are sort of laid out. It's things that you do find in nature, but you find them in mathematics. You do find them in spiritual practices. So I think I'm trying to sort of vibrate and sort of percolate something that is in the aesthetic or cultural, artistic, whatever zeitgeist, and sort of turn it into a watch.
What are you interested to know when you see someone wearing one of your watches that they have come to entirely of their own accord? Do you want to go and talk to them and ask them about why? Or
yes. Yeah, I just want to know, what do they see in there? Because that's also what tattooing is. Tattooing is, I cannot be telling a story. It's not my story I'm telling when I do a tattoo. It's I just provide the language, and the customer provides the story. And I think this is the main difference between crafts for the most part and visual arts, where visual art is very much about telling the story of the artist, especially in its sort of modern form. Whereas crafts need to be at the service of the wearer, of the user, and
Similar. It's a good adjacency there, isn't
yes.
it? Now tell me, I recently got a tattoo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was an emotional experience because you're in this heightened state of you're anticipating pain. You're wondering if you're making a terrible mistake. I think you're quite raw. I think you're in quite a vulnerable state in some ways. I suppose once you've done it many times, I don't have many tattoos, so this is not something I frequently do. And I found it traumatizing slightly. However, it was wonderful when I realized that I really did want what I was getting. I loved it. But I want to know from your perspective, do you think that you can learn a lot about someone when they're being tattooed and the way they respond to it? Do you feel that it's a good insight into someone's soul?
Oh yeah, I think it's an extraordinary moment of exchange. No one will come to a tattooist or to, I guess, a psychotherapist to lie. You know what I'm saying? Like you're not gonna. This is going to go on you. You have to, like, you're not here to perform for me. Like I don't care. Like you're here to tell me exactly the truth about yourself so you can live your entire life with something that truly represents you. It only works if you're really honest and really, really open, and there's a beginning and an end. It's like you're going, I guess, to a therapist. I'm a professional. I have to go back to my normal life after that. You're not. This is part of your life. But for me, this moment has a beginning and an end, and I need to be able to go home and not think about you. But that time that we have together, you have me entirely. It's a sort of moral contract between myself and the client. I will give you everything I have if you give me everything you have. And if you bring everything. And the other beautiful thing about tattooing is that you go to a doctor because you're unwell, usually. Or you go to, if you have to go to talk to a priest or a rabbi, it's probably because also, you want counsel. It's not just to hang out and celebrate life. Whereas with tattooing, you do a tattoo to celebrate something. There's no bad reason or there's no negative reasons to get a tattoo. And that's something even quite beautiful and that I enjoy. And I have to live up to that. And it brings out the best out of me.
It must be intense, man. Really.
Well, yeah, and it's very draining. And what is interesting is that since I have children, I realize that there's something quite similar, but also, I have to be careful with my energy, because if I give too much at work, I get home and I don't have that energy left for my family. I think I got out of college hoping to find that in the profession, and that's not what I find. I did graphic design, I did other stuff, and I loved doing it, but I couldn't find this level of passion that I was looking for. And I did find it in tattooing, and to a large extent, I found it in watchmaking as well. You get a watch because it is meaningful, and for the very reason that you don't need it. And this is also beautiful.
It is. We talked about culture, and I think two big cultural progenitors, two forces, are Virgil Abloh and Kanye West. And interestingly, you've tattooed them both. And I wanted to cheekily ask, in the same style of thinking about the energy I brought to my last tattoo, I was nervous as fuck. And I was quite micromanagey about it and concerned, and then I had to let it go. And I went through this whole cathartic kind of process to a point where I was actually very zen and relaxed, and that me and the tattooist were in a good place. But could you contrast what it was like, those two experiences of, the honor that you had to mark these two men, but also would you mind contrasting what they were like to tattoo?
Yeah, absolutely. The tattoos themselves were not that noteworthy in a lot of ways, but what is interesting, that was the time when Kanye West was working on the Yeezus album. So it's kind of, for me, a very interesting period. And to be clear as well, after that, things took a certain turn that, I was not associated or with whatsoever. Virgil got in touch with me, I believe, through Tumblr back in the day, and had been following me on Tumblr and wanted to get tattooed, and he had kind of just started working with Kanye. Got in touch, and it's only probably 2 or 3 years after his first email that I got around tattooing him. And I gave him a copy of my magazine, Someway, that he gave to Kanye West while Kanye was in London. And Kanye called me because he really liked the magazine and wanted me to work with him on art direction stuff. And I tattooed Kanye as part of that, but really I worked for about a year with him on all kind of art direction things, brainstorming, and as he does, and Virgil was involved as well. The overall experience of being all of a sudden involved in this specific moment, especially with the role that Kanye West had culturally in the first half of the tens, I guess, was very inspiring, because Kanye was at the peak, in a lot of ways, at the peak of his vision, where seeing how he surrounded himself with other creative people, everything around him was curated and worked on as a almost Renaissance sort of vision of everything. Myself trying to do my own projects, trying to be an entrepreneur as well, and seeing implemented on the level that he was on, of how does a vision like that is built progressively from the ground up to being what it is, was extremely inspiring, and how he sort of was the orchestrator of all of that.
I think to finish off, you've been so generous with your time, Maxime. Thank you very much. And this has truly been quite an incredible journey from the Jura Valley through to, the inner circle of Kanye at the peak of his powers. It's a pretty cool story, man. But I just wondered, again, for the watch geeks out there that are listening, thinking, I wonder which watch of your Sangleur series, which model do you think was closest to your vision?
It's a great question, because I have very specific opinions. I think that for me, something was really incredible with the high jewelry version of the first Sangleur. I always loved the high jewelry pieces that Hublot did. I think they are one of the best brands, if not the my favorite brands, in the work they do with on high jewelry. And it's pieces you almost never see. They're often either private sort of custom orders, or just don't really appear like that on Instagram. I think Hublot, I remember seeing I don't know if it was $1 million bang or something like that. I mean, they high jewelry pieces always stood out to me. And when we did the high jewelry piece version of the Sangleur 1, I was like, this is peak Hublot, but also peak Maxime. Which was, awesome, absolutely awesome. There's the rose gold version that I think rapper Young Thug owns, which is one of my biggest. For me, this is probably that even above tops the Kanye West experience. Like for me, having Young Thug wear one of my pieces is one of my greatest professional achievement. But the black ceramic version of the Sangleur 2 was also a form of peak Hublot signature, but also there's something very pure. I think all my watches were meant to be perceived in 3D. They're not a 2D thing. And I feel that having sort of monochromatic treatment is where you get the 3D quality of a piece in the purest form. And I do have to say, for the 3, there's something with the titanium version. There's a lot of work on the polishing of the different surfaces. That said, my favorite is not out yet. There is...
Oh, you can't say that, man. That's what everybody says.
My favorite is coming up in spring, and you will see it's that iteration that is the last part of peak Hublot, for me. It's something that has not been done with the 2 previous designs. If nothing else comes after that, I will have achieved what I wanted with watch design. Let's leave it at that.
It's been such a lively conversation, and I really couldn't have hoped for more from someone who kind of seems like they're from outer space sometimes with these visions. You're really a down-to-earth guy that has this super roots Swiss story to tell. It's been an absolute pleasure, man, and it was not at all what I expected. It was far better. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much. And it's exactly my feeling as well. So, hit me up anytime and we'll continue this conversation.
I don't know what your impression of time was during that episode, but for me, that was a very fast and fluid 15 minutes. That was 100% not 15 minutes. Maxime, thank you for your time. Thank you for your openness. Nevena and Annabelle from Hublot, thank you for organizing that chat. And Darren, thank you always for making these technical difficulties like broken connections and AirPod microphones. Thank you for making it sound so good. It is a wonderful thing. Thank you for listening to Watches, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. It is a wild and wonderful journey, and it's great to have you on it.